As the wife of a man of color and the mother of biracial children, one may think I can learn nothing from an organization like Moms Against Racism. That couldn't be further from the truth. Everyone can learn from Moms Against Racism. On my next episode, founder and president Kerry joins me to talk about how the organization works via advocacy, education, and so much more in an effort to root out racial biases and help to raise anti-racist children. This is a conversation where Kerry shares her story, the evolution of how Moms Against Racism came to be, and teachings that you don't want to miss. Here is Kerry Cavers of Moms Against Racism, coming up next on Rachel Thexton Connects. So here we are in episode 2 of season 4 of Rachel Thexton Connects. And I don't know how it happened, but I managed to meet these amazing humans and secure them and confirm them to join me on the podcast. And I'm honored to present my next guest, Kerry Cavers, founder and president of Moms Against Racism. Welcome to the podcast, Kerry. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to chat with you.
It's great to have you here, Kerry. We were introduced by a mutual friend and colleague, and the work that you do interested me. As many know, I'm married to a man of color and have a biracial family and a son of color as well. And so your work and the organization and just all the many things that you do that are so vital stood out to me right away. So let's jump in. I want to learn more about you. So, Kerry, you've shared in the past, and I've read in your bio, that you grew up here in BC, disconnected from your heritage, living in an area of the province where you were one of the few people of color. So can you tell us a bit about your experience growing up and, how that shaped you as a child, as a youth, and who you are today, as I call a woman on a mission?
Yes. Yeah, thanks. I think I had a unique and not unique upbringing in that I grew up in Tsawwassen, which at the time, very, very white, very affluent town. And I was one of the only Black kids who went through school at the time. And there were a couple of other kids of color that I was able to connect with. But I grew up with my mom. She was white, and my dad was Black. And so I grew up just with my mom and not really having much connection to my dad or my dad's side of the family. And that experience was interesting. Like, there was lots of other layers to it as well. My mom was an alcoholic, and she had her own struggles to deal with. And so there wasn't a lot of guidance for me in general, but specifically for connection to culture or building that sense of my own identity and who I am. So for me, moving through the world, it was very much just try and fit in and not rock the boat. Going through school, there was, just like any kid, right? Wanting to feel connected, wanting to feel like you belong, and doing what you need to do to try and kind of fit in, but then also at the same time, never actually really fitting in. And so it was an interesting experience. And for myself, like, there was some, overt racist experiences that I had for myself growing up, being disconnected. Like, race and my own racial identity wasn't something that was on my radar until kind of my first jarring experience, where then I was like, what does this mean? And, looking in the mirror for the first time and recognizing, like, oh, right, yes, like, I do have a different color skin. And then having experiences here and there of picking that up. And I think there's lots of, in your face experiences, those overt experiences that happen, but more often than not, it's the hidden, the covert ones that send those subtle messages to, especially to kids, that they wouldn't necessarily, and I didn't necessarily consciously understand, but they still have an impact on who you are as a person and how you form that identity as you grow up. So things like the paper boy told me that I was adopted because I didn't look like my mom. And he told me so many times that it actually, for years, I questioned my mom and didn't believe my mom.
My.
I had experiences in school, in high school, actually. I had a group of friends I was in grade 10 and they were in grade 12. One of the girls that I was friends with came out and we met up in the hallway and we were chatting. She said, we were just talking about you in English class. And I was like, what do you mean? Like my group of friends, like you were just talking about me? And she's like, no, like the whole class, because they were reading a story about a Black character and their experience. And the class and the teacher felt it was appropriate to bring me into the conversation, somebody who wasn't actually in the class, and to say, I wonder what Kerry's experience is like being in the school and this and that. And I was mortified because there were boys in that class that I liked, and I didn't want them talking about me that way.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting experience. And then now as an adult, kind of reconciling that I didn't have that support and guidance poured into me and that connection to culture. How do I go about reclaiming that and connecting that? And for a lot of biracial folks that I speak to, or just people, like racialized folks who have been disconnected from their culture, oftentimes at my generation, our generation, at the time when we were growing up, assimilation was the safe way to go.
Yes.
So, our parents really pushed us as kids to, drop our accents or to fit in or to do all of these kinds of things. And there's a lot of people now that I connect with that are trying to fill in what feels like a hole of their identity and reconnecting with that. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does. I would imagine, I could never imagine completely, but that it built a lot of things in you, including a great deal of strength, which sometimes results in pretty amazing things. Not to diminish the atrocities of things that were done and said, but reconciling, if you're able to heal, sometimes you find yourself pretty powerful, and you seem like a very powerful person to me. Do you feel powerful?
I do. I think it's a power that I am continuously stepping into. There's been many, many years of therapy and healing to be able to get to this place. And, I do think the experiences that we go through in life, we can use them to shape us and become our favorite versions of ourselves, but that it's hard work and that it can be scary too. And not everybody is in a place to do that.
Yeah. It's a great point.
And it's the whole idea of, the word resilience, right? Like a lot of racialized folks, we get held up as being resilient. And while yes, I think it's important that we honor that experience and the triumph and the moving through, it also feels almost like a way to kind of gaslight and to make those experiences okay when they're not. It's very similar to like for moms, when we're saying like we're drowning and it's like, oh, but you're a superhero, and it's like that doesn't take away any of all of the things, right?
Yeah. That's a wow. Yeah. I think it's perspectives and pieces like that, Kerry, that are really important. I may say to you what I said just now about your power being powerful. I hope I acknowledged the atrocities, but I probably likely did not say it in a perfect way. But it's those learning pieces, I think, that are really important with these discussions. And it's important to me anyway. And I think a lot of, how would you describe, what is the word that you prefer for those who are people who are not of color?
Instead of using like resilience?
No. So if I was to say people who are white, Caucasian,
Yeah. So
non-racialized, how would you use?
good question. So Caucasian is a term that we don't use anymore. Okay. There's a lot of articles and blog posts as to why. So I would encourage anybody to look that up. But generally the term that I use is like white folks or white people. It's a racialized identity. So when we're looking at race in general, it's a social construct. It's been made up. So there's no actual biological fact of race. So, and I think it was in like 96 or 98, there was the genome product that showed across the races, we're genetically 98% similar. And so this idea of being able to categorize people based on race, that being like skin color and facial features and hair type, and then all of the cultural things that go into it. White folks have a white racialized identity, but because of white supremacy and racism, that racialized identity has become the norm or the default. So in it being normalized, it's almost not identified. So I think it's important to say white folks so that we can look at the way that these concepts and constructs interact with each other in these like hierarchies of power and oppression.
Right. Ones that many of us white folks are not aware of or maybe prefer not to look at.
Yes.
Or, yeah. This is a story that you shared on your blog. It's a personal one, but I thought I wanted to share and ask you about it because it moved me and it gave me a feeling of anger. And as a white person, having that feeling of anger is really beside the point. But just as the host, I'm sharing that's how I felt angry. You shared that you were denied birthday cake as a child and that it was incredibly impactful, clearly. Can you describe that incident and how you remember feeling? And do you think that those kinds of overtly racist experiences resulted in kind of creating, and I know this is speculation to some point, but the woman you are today and what you do?
Yeah. So in Swassen, where I grew up, in the little subdevelopment that I was in, there was a group of us kids that were all the same age. We all ran together. And one of them was having a birthday party. And I mean, I think I was 7 or 8. And when you're 7 or 8, truly the thing that you're most excited for at a birthday is birthday cake, right? Yeah. And the goodie bag, if you're going to get a goodie bag.
Yes.
And so we went to this birthday party, and I remember standing at the table, and it was like a cake cutting, and the birthday kiddo was helping like cut and hand out the cake. And so I was watching all of these pieces get handed out to all of our other little friends. And we were getting like closer and closer to the end of the cake. And in my little mind, I was like, there must be a second cake because, I haven't gotten a piece yet. And we got to the very end and all the cake had been handed out and I didn't get a piece. And I was really confused. And so I was like, hey, little kid voice says, like, do I get some cake? Can I have a piece of cake? And the response was, well, no, because you're Black. And as I mentioned before, like growing up the way that I had it, no one had talked to me about that before in my family about that. And so I was really confused, but I knew in that moment it was a bad thing being Black, not getting cake, being othered. And so I ran home and I cried. And it was kind of at that point where my Blackness was brought into my awareness. And I think it definitely I mean, it obviously impacted me because it was a story that I've carried for a very long time. And I think in the sense that I've always been someone who has wanted to make people feel welcomed and included, and have been a protector of others, and, a community builder, and helping the underdog or rooting for the underdog. So I think in that way, in that early experience of being othered, that shaped that. But it truly wasn't for me until my partner and I, and he's white. We were expecting our first child, that it really shifted in me that something in this world needs to change racially, because for me, it was all about my survival and fly under the radar up until that time. But I think for many parents, once you are expecting kids, you look at the world in a very different way. And for me, I was like, oh no, like this is not okay. I don't want the same experience that I had, and the hurt and the harm that I had. I didn't want that for my kids.
Isn't that interesting? And I don't speak only to the issue of race, but how we think to ourselves at times, it's okay for us to feel that, but our kids can never feel that. It's that protective, like it's almost this kind of this natural thing in us that comes out sometimes, which is, it's something about self-care, I suppose, but also just mothers and moms against racism. I'm looking forward to talking about that, but thank you for sharing that experience. I know it's not an easy one to talk about. You're a mother, and we were just sharing that our children, we both have 3 children and around the same ages. And interesting enough, both in a biracial family as well. How does kind of balancing what your experiences were like growing up and some of the things that happened to you and for you and what you've learned, how does that affect how you teach and how you guide your children in this world today? It's a tough question, I think, but I don't know. Maybe you have a perfect answer.
Oh God, no. No perfection. There's no perfection in this, just progress. And I think going back to like the question before, and even a question before, and talking about like power and becoming a parent, I think for me, and I recognize that this is not everybody's path, but for me, not becoming my mother was a big driving force for how I wanted to parent. And so there was a lot of emotional intelligence development for me intentionally, even before we got to having kids. And that is something that is continued on for me, as to how to continuously show up and be a better parent. Part of that is doing my own inner work and my own trauma healing, because it's interesting. I believe we all have that little kiddo inside of us, still trying to keep us safe with whatever strategies that we created. And so
Yes.
when my kids have experiences that are similar to what I went through, the little girl in me is, like yelling, like, don't do it that way. And so there's a lot of reparenting of myself in the moment too, to be able to show up in a way that is softer, that is guiding and not punishing, and that is pouring into them and helping them develop their own sense of who they are, and to be connected as well. And I think that I feel that I have been very blessed with the community in MAR, because most of the people who are in that community are on that similar journey of, they've said, I know that this is going to hurt. I know that this is hard work, but I want to do this work to be able to show up for my kids and to make the world a better place. And, not everybody is in that place to do that work. And I believe, like, anti-racism work, getting into doing anti-racism work, it is deep healing work, because it challenges so many of our beliefs about ourselves and about the world. both for racialized folks and for white folks, right? We've all been socialized under this white supremacy ideology, and it has done trauma to racialized folks, but it's also done trauma to white folks. And so, when you said my anger about this situation, it doesn't really matter. And I'm like, no, yeah, it does. Like, your feelings in this are very important and valid too. And it's all part of that process of unlearning what we have absorbed that has kept us disconnected from ourselves and thereby disconnected from each other.
Wow. Okay. I have about 5 follow-up questions for each question, but I sent Kerry so many questions that she almost fell off her chair. So I need to stay on track. Thank you for continuing to share. It's a lot of great insight. You have a bachelor's degree. I thought this was so interesting. And I have to say, if I was going to go back to school, this was where I'd go. So you have a bachelor's degree in psychology and in emotional intelligence. Why did you choose these areas of study? And how do you think they impact the work you do today? Tell me about these areas of study.
Well, I think it's funny because it's within the community of like people who go to learn psychology and maybe become counselors. It's like a joke, common knowledge / that like people go into psychology because of the trauma that they've experienced. So
No, really?
So for me and for many folks, it's that I want to figure out why this happened. I want to figure out why I am the way that I am. How did I get here? How do I heal this? How do I move forward? How do I make it better for others? And so that's what brought me into psychology. I wanted to, from a very young age, I was like, I'm going to be a psychologist, because often too, I found that a lot of my friends were coming to me to talk to me about, really heavy topics. And I really enjoyed helping people and talking through that. So that's what brought me into psychology. And life circumstances happened, and I didn't continue on to do my master's. Choices were made, but then later on in life, I kind of came back around. And with the emotional intelligence, I'm actually a certified practitioner, so it's not a degree, but a certified practitioner in emotional intelligence to look at all of those different dimensions. And I like to nerd out on all of those things of why people do the way things that they do. And so looking at, everything nervous system related, attachment theory related, like all those kinds of things. That is a passion for me. And I think it's also been helpful in being able to have these conversations, because like you were saying, these are tough conversations and they're tough subjects. And if one of Mars values is healing, because we recognize that if you are still feeling bruised or wounded or activated, it's much harder to take in this information and to be able to process it and move forward with it. So like the psychology of it is, if somebody is feeling attacked or there's danger, their fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and I think there's another one, flop, anyone, response will go off. And that's no moral judgment on anybody. That's wired into our brains. And that threat could be anything. Like it could be a real, actual, well, I shouldn't say real, but like a physical threat to your physical safety. Or it could be I need to respond to this email. Our brains don't differentiate from the size of the threat. So when we're having conversations about these tough topics, whereby someone, for example, if we're having this conversation and perhaps you perceive me saying that you are a bad person, and then bad person means unlovable, which means unsafe, your fight, flight, freeze, fawn might go off. And then we're not going to get anywhere, right? So I think having that understanding in psychology and emotional intelligence and, how our nervous system works has really helped in shaping how we share the message and bring people along on this anti-racism journey.
Yes, my next question is specifically talking about Moms Against Racism so that we can dive into that. But just really quickly, regulation. Would regulation have to do with emotional intelligence? Because I have to admit, regulation is an area that I've had to have a lot of support with throughout my development in life. And I think if we're not regulated, it's really hard to have discussions about difficult things, especially when we all have to admit that we're imperfect and that we have things to learn. Thoughts on regulation quickly?
Yeah. So there, with regulation, we have this window of tolerance, right? And so our window of tolerance can be big, and sometimes it can be small, and it fluctuates, right? Sometimes I tell my husband, I'm like, my window of tolerance is a peephole in a door right now. And that just means, like, how many spoons, how much bandwidth do we have before we're going to get pushed into that fight, flight, freeze response? And there's so much that goes into where our window of tolerance might be at any given time. Our own personal experiences, what's going on, but then also the way that our society is set up. So when we're, as individuals, feeling the crunch because, cost of living, or, we're raising kids while also caring for aging parents, or, all of these kinds of things, they put pressure on our ability to regulate ourselves. And, there's lots of different things that we can do. And the more that we learn about who we are, we can learn how to regulate ourselves. But a big part of regulation too is connection and that co-regulation. And we are a deeply disconnected society right now. And so we struggle with that too. So I do think it's a really important thing. I think, in connection to emotional intelligence, it's not necessarily a specific aspect of it, although like reactivity, and it is. But with emotional intelligence, the more we have that understanding about ourselves, about how we express, or how empathetic we are, or our own sense of social responsibility, or different aspects of emotional intelligence, it can help us better understand what we personally need to be able to regulate. And I think even in the bigger picture of things, bringing in like neurodivergence and different ways brains work differently, and how our society try and shoves us all into the same little, this one size fits all, when it doesn't. So that idea of regulation, I mean, it even not too long ago, it comes with so much moral judgment too, instead of just, this is a normal biomechanical thing that everybody has, as opposed to like, you are somehow failing at being a human, or you're a bad human because you have big feelings.
Yeah, or you're acting crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is the worst. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that, Kerry. Tell us about Moms Against Racism, MAR. How and why and when did you decide to start the organization? How it came about? This organization does so many things. We won't get through half of what they do in the communities across the country. Amazing work. I'll let you take the lead on that, Kerry.
So, as I was saying, for most of my life, just kind of flew under the radar. I would have conversations about my experiences of racism with my friends, and I've been that person that people can always come and talk to. So that was kind of always out there. When we were expecting our first child, I realized, like I said, that like, this is now no longer about just me, and genetics are wild, right? So my husband and I, we could have a child and they could come out even darker than I am. And recognizing that, he and I hadn't had much conversations about race in my experiences through that lens, nor had we had any conversations with his parents. And so I'm picturing like them taking this, black baby out in the park in the stroller and getting all of these questions and comments from people. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I got to prepare my family for what they're going to be experiencing. And so that kind of started the ball rolling a little bit more on having those conversations a little bit more openly. And then in 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, I had several mom friends reach out to me and say, and I think this time feels different, which is a hard thing to say for how many years it kind of took to get there. But at the same time, we live in a society that was intentionally making it hard to come to this awareness. So there's grace there too. And so my friends reached out to me and said, we want to have these conversations. We want to learn how to raise anti-racist kids. Will you help us? And I said yes. And so then they started all asking like the very similar questions, and it felt like a lot of emotional labor. And I was like, okay, I'm going to create a Facebook group, and we'll all get together. You can ask your questions. I will answer your questions. But if we do it this way, we can have like group learning, and I don't have to answer the same question more than once. And so I invited like 30 different moms to this Facebook group and called it Moms Against Racism. Was quite surprised that that name was still available, and also not surprised. And then went to bed, and the next morning there was 140 people on the group. And I was like, oh, okay, this was not what I was thinking, but I've held audiences of this size before, so okay, I can do this. And so then I made the group private so that it wouldn't continue to grow. And then within that first week, there was a backup of 1,500 people either requesting to join or being invited to join. And then I got invited to speak on a panel about racism in education. And then we were asked to participate in a letter writing campaign. And so I call Mar our like Bob Ross happy little accident, because I did not intend to start a national nonprofit anti-racism movement. But this is where we are. And I think that's the beauty of Mar too, because I almost feel like if I had tried to do this, all of my own shortcomings would have been built into it. Whereas now it's been so organic and so collaborative, and by nature, just practicing those anti-oppressive principles. And where we go is because there's somebody within the group that has that skill set or has that passion, and we go in that direction. So it's been very organic and fluid in that way, and very beautiful in that way. So now we have 2,300 members in a private Facebook group, which we've had that for a while, and we didn't really understand why, because we kept adding new members to the group all the time. And then I had some friends start reaching out to me going, why did you kick me out of the group? Like, was I a bad white person? I'm so sorry. And I was like, what are you talking about? And we looked into it a little bit more, and Facebook had started randomly removing people from the group. So our membership numbers have stayed hovering around 2,300 for I'd say like the last 2 years, which makes me sad, because there's going to be so many people out there who are probably thinking they did something wrong and we removed them,
Right.
when that wasn't the case.
I would talk in more detail about that, but there's been some censorship as well regarding conversation on that topic. So I will, for wanting this to publish and everything to run and stream, but I see, and I am not surprised at all, and something must be done there. So your team does a lot of work, advocacy, education, teachings, answering questions. Can you go down that list as what I've missed? Because there's a lot.
There is a lot. So I mean, as I said, we started as a kind of a group to talk things through and to support each other. And then from there we grew. So we added an education advocacy team, childcare, healthcare, and arts, recreation, culture, and sport, all 4 advocacy teams to look at those particular areas and see in that 0 to grade 12 range, what can we do to make systemic change? What can we do to empower people? What can we do to support families who are navigating the systems within this, especially for, kiddos who are racialized, to try and make things better for them. And within that, we've come up with some really amazing programs. So one of our first was our diverse book baskets. And so recognizing that, if you go and do an audit on your bookshelf, and pulling them off and putting them into piles, like how many books have, main characters that are characters of color, or all characters who are characters of color, and just recognizing that, within the publishing industry, it has been very white dominated and centered for a very long time. And that representation matters. Like if you can't see yourself somewhere as like a little racialized kid, then it's harder to set those goals to be there. Books are a great, what was said, and I apologize, I can't remember the person who originally said this, that are windows and mirrors, or mirrors and windows. So for me, growing up in Tsawwassen, I had a very whitewashed experience where, my mom was white, my teachers were white, my friends were white, the materials that we were looking at in books, they were white. So whiteness was reflected back to me. And with the diverse book baskets, we send 10 racially, culturally diverse books to families and classrooms across Canada. You can request one to be sent for free. You can sponsor somebody, or we have a lot of parents who will pick them up as teacher gifts and give them to their teachers. And we know teachers are under-resourced, and so this is a really fast way for them to diversify their bookshelf. And so it helps both racialized kids see themselves represented in the books that are being read in the classroom, but then it also helps white kids become comfortable with the idea that the world does not revolve around them and that they are not the hero in every story. And so that's a really important part too. And so we send out anywhere from about 150 to 180 book baskets a year. It's all funding dependent. So I know right now we have about 20 people on our wait list waiting for book baskets. And so we've done that. And then we have our MAR talks and our MAR shifts. So those are our workshops. MAR shifts are our workshops that we bring. We host them publicly so that anybody can sign up to attend, but we also work with parent advisory councils, and we'll do PAC workshops. We do Pro-D training as well to work with educators and on a range of topics, going from like unconscious bias, starting at the beginning, to more anti-racism, like deep in how that happens, to cultural appropriation, and a lot of different ways to help people kind of understand. And then our MAR Talks is speaking with BIPOC subject matter experts to talk about their experiences and how things show up. And we look at different things around like neuroinclusion, so that intersection between race and neurodivergence, or looking at different aspects of healing or trauma-informed practices. And we talk with a lot of authors too about different things. And then we have our Be a Kid program as well. So I will plug that. But we take BIPOC kids and their families out to do monthly activities. Then we also have a annual family camp that we just had this weekend, and it was absolutely amazing. As racialized kiddos, oftentimes when we go and do an activity, we can be one of the only, and then there's this sense of hyper visibility, having to show up and be perfect, not being able to get anything wrong. Sometimes when we go to different activities and establishments, there will be over policing. So BIPOC kids get corrected or punished at a higher rate, or disciplined at a higher rate than white kids. So there's that. And then there's just the experiences, like very direct overt experiences of racism that kids can experience doing things. So we wanted to try and make a safer space for families to be able to go and have these experiences. And some of my favorites are just like things I would never have thought of. But one of my favorites is we took, and they usually sell out at about 50 people. So we took a huge group of people ice skating. Really, the activities are for the kids to be able to experience this, but the families do it too. And the number of racialized parents who had never been ice skating before was huge, because that can be a very intimidating place. You get on ice skates, you're likely going to fall. Is somebody going to make fun of you? And, all of these kinds of things. But they felt safe enough to go as a group to give this a try and be able to show up for their kids in that way. And then there's also, a lot of knowledge around different activities that we do in Western society that a lot of families don't have access to. And there can be a lot of shame around that. If you're a racialized family who's never gone camping before, as like a racialized dad. I was speaking with a dad of Chinese descent who, with our family camp, we were going to teach everybody how to set up a tent and do a campfire. And they were so grateful because, as a man, those are things that you're supposed to know and you should know. And it takes a lot to be able to admit that you don't. And so some families, some kids don't get those experiences because of, the shame that their parents are carrying. So we're trying to reduce those barriers while also building that community and that sense of connection and validation in those experiences of racism.
Wow. And did that come from feedback from community members, just to kind of gathering and knowing, and from your own knowledge that some of those experiences are ones in which we as white people may take for granted, like the camping or skating or maybe even swimming?
Yeah. There was that particular program was born because we were out at a park and a parent just remarked, wow, it's really nice to be able to watch my kids play and not worry. And I was like, yeah, we need to do something here. And just thinking about, horseback riding and all of these different things that these kiddos should be able to experience in an environment where they're not also having to worry about how they're going to be treated. And their parents and how they're going to be treated.
I wanted to ask you about on your blog.
Can I cut in for a sec?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Your sound is really quiet.
Thank you.
Bye. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I turned it down. Thank you for that. On your blog, you have explored the question of, am I Black enough? And I'm quite interested in these complexities of mixed race identity. I'm a white mother, married to a man of color. I have 2 biracial children and 1 son who's a boy of color. So, and also my middle son is neurodivergent. So you've got a lot of mixes in there of when it comes to the way that we were all made, the way we're supposed to be, but learning, right? And so I would love to I'm interested in learning how I can support, and others, I'm sure there's many others like me, can support biracial families in ways that, helps to, like you say, helps to not leave the culture out of the picture, but have that teaching and have it incorporated, but also not be pushing your own feelings and your own this and that on the family. So just any thoughts on that in the biracial space and what you've been learning and what you've learned over your lifetime?
I'll share with you. We have one of our MAR volunteers. She is a white mom and an educator, and she has 2 biracial kids, and she shares this story freely, so I am confident in sharing it. But when she joined MAR, she felt that she had a good understanding of how to parent because she had done some work and there was an awareness that her kids are biracial and it's a different experience. And from being in MAR, she realized how much more she didn't know. And I, give her kudos because that is a hard place to be when you are a parent, to be able to admit that you don't know and that you might not have all of the answers for your kiddos, and that, the big thing, I think, being, a white parent of a racialized child or a biracial child is recognizing that you will never have their experience. You will never know intimately what their experience is. And as a parent, we often want to make things better for our kids, and we can come at things like, we do know. And so being able to hold space and have that humility of, I don't know what this is, and I might not be the best person for you to talk to about that. So let's find somebody who does more intimately understand what your experience is and connecting them. My blog post of Am I Black Enough is a little bit flippant in that. So me being biracial, my ancestry is Swedish, Irish, and English on my mom's side, so colonizers, and African on my dad's side, and most likely from Mali and Nigeria. But because of colonization and enslavement, like that history is broken, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But I have that experience of definitely not white and not fitting in with the white group. And for a lot of Black folks, I'm also not Black enough to fit in with that side. So where does that leave me? And in the conversation about race and racism, because as humans, we love binaries. We love it's either this or that biracial people get left out of the conversation, and their experience often gets erased, and it feels like this, what some people are calling like that third culture almost. And
Right.
it is both a place of nuanced or different impacts and oppression, but also an opportunity to be able to potentially bridge and knowing both cultures or both sides when you're biracial or multiracial. And so it's interesting. And I think, going back to the comment of with white supremacy and white supremacy ideology, that we are all carrying trauma from this. There's a Resmaa Menakem wrote a book, My Grandmother's Hands, which is an amazing book, and I encourage everybody to read it. But he talks about, white body trauma and Black body trauma and actually police body trauma, and how we are all bringing that with us in the interactions that we have, and that all of it needs to be addressed and healed. And I think for parents who are raising biracial kids, there's so much uniqueness in everybody's different experiences and stories. And we often, as human beings, like the psychology of it, we like to categorize and simplify because it's easier for us to understand, but being able to hold space for that nuance. So like a racialized parent who is a parent of a biracial kid may have internalized white supremacy and treat their child differently because they're biracial. Maybe they're more fair skinned, and in our society, that the hierarchy of it is the closer proximity you are to whiteness, the better the person you are. And so in a lot of racialized families, those fairer skinned kids get exalted as the good kid, the beautiful kid. And then when you have a sibling who's darker skinned, what message does that send to them about who they are and their value, right? And then you might have a white parent of a racialized child or a biracial child. And that I often see that white parent will then give themselves a pass from examining any internalized white supremacy, because they'll say, well, I married a person of color, or I have a child of color, so I couldn't possibly be racist.
Yes, no. Couldn't be possible.
No, look at how good I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that manifests in a whole bunch of different ways, right? I've seen racialized parents both over discipline their biracial kids, especially if they're white presenting biracial kids, because they're wanting to really drive home, I guess, that responsibility and accountability that that kiddo has walking through the world being white presenting. And it's like, okay, yes, and let's also allow them to have the complexity of their biracialness in this. And so there's, you know, there's such that spectrum and of experience. But I think, you know, the biggest thing is recognizing that the biracial experience is going to be different than the experience of someone who is monoracial, and is going to be different than somebody who is, you know, monoracial and was born here in Canada, or monoracial and born, you know, in their country of ancestry, right? Like there's so many different experiences that we need to be able to hold space for all of them.
What an important topic in such a diverse country where beautifully we're seeing, you know, so many diverse families, but it's a conversation that is so important for the reasons that you've just discussed and many more, I'm sure. So just another reason why Moms Against Racism's work is I believe, you know, a foundation of family health. It in all ways, it's so very important. One thing I found interesting, Kerry, you highlighted in some of your writing, I believe, that racism in Canada is often quieter and more readily denied compared to the US, masked by myths of politeness and multiculturalism. So we talk about, you know, the history, the very popular movies of slavery in the United States, you know, that people have seen in Hollywood, and those stories, and that happens there, and the police stories and George Floyd and the other tragedies there. What about Canada? Where are we? I mean, my kids are hearing the slurs. I thought we were past that. What strategies are effective in educating and discussing the Canadian denial?
Yeah. So Canadians love to say, thank God we're not the US, or at least we're not the US. And while, you know, there is some validity to that, something to keep in mind is that the US has 10 times the population that we do. So they're going to have, you know, or theoretically should have 10 times the incidences, 10 times the exposure, 10 times all of this. So it's not necessarily that the US is worse than us, because when you look at like per capita stats, it's the exact same when we're talking about, you know, like violence and deaths that are happening, or imprisonment, and like all of these kinds of big concepts. Like it is happening here too. We just don't necessarily hear about it at the same volume that we do with the US. And Canada has had an amazing PR campaign to be a multicultural haven, somewhere that is very accepting and more polite, and all this in this persona of what it means to be Canadian. And so when we have so many people being raised on that, it almost shields people from looking deeper, right? They've accepted this surface level idea of what it means to live in Canada. And then any information that's contrary to that is well, that's not what I know kind of answer. And so within Canada, like there's definitely those very overt and direct experiences of racism where there's the N word, or there's the physical violence. And it's definitely been increasing over the last several years with the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes because of the pandemic and the emboldenedness of people with just what is happening in the world, that there's not that accountability or consequence really anymore to being racist. So I had a girlfriend of mine of South Asian descent just tell me yesterday that she was being followed around by a white man who was yelling things at her, and she had to go into the mall and get security before he would leave her alone. And so these things are happening and more, but like a lot of the racism that is experienced here are those stares, right? So people stare. Like or the not helping. So for example, like if I go out and eat anywhere in any public space, there will be some white person watching me eat. And, and I can feel it. And it's harder to address those instances because they're easier to excuse. So like if I were to turn to somebody and be like, are you watching me while I'm eating? That person's going to be like, oh no, I was just like looking over your shoulder out the window. And so I don't have any way to like concretely address the situation versus if someone, calls me a name, and then that's very much out there. And so that's like a lot of the racism that we experience, or the absence of benefits, right? So I went shopping with two friends of mine, and one of them being white and not really ever experiencing this before. And they watched me stand at the till waiting to pay for something. And it was a bit of a social experiment because they were standing, away from me. So it looked like it was just me. And they watched staff walk all by, and I just stood and I waited. And finally somebody came over to check me out. And, she was like, I couldn't believe that's what happens. And that's those kinds of things. So like when you're a racialized person, it feels really, we are conditioned to essentially gaslight ourselves, right? Of like, well, maybe that person is really busy and they'll get to me, or is this really about race, or, that kind of thing. And so it makes it really hard to address those situations.
Wow. So, yeah, education even more important at younger and younger ages of the different complexities and ways in which people are experiencing the world, in which white people will never know, like you say, nor will I as a mom ever know the experience of my biracial children or my son of color, which it makes me sad, but I accept it and I respect it. And I want to learn how to do better and how to do my best. I guess I say it makes me sad because it makes me feel ill-equipped. But on the same note, there's organizations like yours where I can learn more. So that is hope. There's a lot of emotional labor involved in this work, I would imagine. Just based on what we've been discussing, even just today, the risk of burnout and mental health. And what strategies do you use personally, Kerry, just to make sure that you are well and that as an organization, you have the energy and your team has the energy that they need to kind of do the work that you do in the spaces that you do?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about self-care and community care within MAR as part of healing, and self-care not being the, pedicures and bubble baths, but like boundary setting and saying, this is my capacity, or being transparent and direct, and that is self-care as well. And then community care being showing up for each other and helping each other and being that village. And for me, when I get into those spaces, like it's actually really, while it is draining and taxing to have these conversations, it also fills my cup, having these conversations and seeing people make those connections and make that learning and knowing that I'm helping someone. But when it does get too heavy, I'm very grateful to be just a few blocks from the ocean. And I will walk down and I like to sit at the ocean, and, the ocean is sacred waters, and just listening to the waves coming in and out really helps calm me and bring me into that state of regulation. So I know that that's a thing for me. And then also grounding in that relationship with my kids. So sometimes when it gets really frustrating and I'm like, why am I doing this? And it feels like too much. We could just run away to some small beach town and I didn't have to do any of this. I spend some time with my kids, and then again, like their laughter, their silliness, them themselves helps to refill my cup too. And then time with friends, I think is really important as well, and laughing and memes and gifts are life. I love those. We trade them like therapy amongst my friends. So just, yeah, finding some of those little ways. And then for me, I think one of the learnings that I am leaning into more and more is, that unlearning of people pleasing and being able to put in those boundaries and being able to say, I can't do this, and it's okay that I don't do this, and letting go of things. And that is self care too. And it can be really scary when you have been show up for everybody and don't fail and do all of the things and everything like that. So that's
Always say yes.
always say yes. Yeah. So that has been one of the biggest self care things that I am practicing. I laugh because there's this meme of like, there's this picture and it's like a front yard and there's no fence, but there's like a little gate and it's like me setting boundaries, right? Yes, that's how it is in the beginning. And if you haven't learned how to set boundaries, it can feel really hard and like you're being a really mean and terrible person.
Yes.
And so it is definitely a practice.
Boundaries, they're challenging and they take time, but they're so important. It's a great point. I want to close off, Kerry, by asking you kind of a multi-pronged question. Looking 5 or 10 years into the future, what's your vision for the evolution of MAR, Moms Against Racism? Your hope for the impact of this work? And then the second part is, how can people support the work that you're doing?
Thank you for asking that. So this past weekend, we had our 3rd annual Be a Kid family camp, and we had 80 campers. We have 44 kids, all kids of color, and their families, their caregivers, their adults. And it was a beautiful experience of what a village actually feels like. There was moms talking and there was dads talking, and it was like, it doesn't matter that this isn't your kiddo, we're going and doing an activity together. And the big kids were looking after the little kids, and it was really beautiful. And I feel like for me, the village is possible. And, I think for some of the families too, it was the seed of, oh my gosh, this is what a village feels like. And so my vision, my hope for MAR in the next couple of years is I would love to have a MAR house kind of in it. I mean, the big vision, MAR house, every major city where families can come, and there would be washing machines, there would be a garden at back, there would be a kitchen that we could make food together, there would be a childcare space, there would be office space, and it would just be that village where you can come and you can bring your kids and you know that they're going to be auntied in a good way, and that you can do what you need to do and you can fill your cup with the connection. And there's so much work to be done when we're talking about dismantling systemic racism, and it sounds kind of pessimistic, but I don't think that racism is going to be gone in my lifetime. And it's also somewhat liberating to say that and to lean into that, because I then know I just need to do what I can do. I don't need to do the whole thing, and I need to set up my kids in a better way to stand on my shoulders. A big part of the work that we do and the way that we do it is I personally believe that relationship is the remedy to racism. So when we as individuals can learn how to be in relationship with ourselves, with each other, cross culturally, that is going to have a huge ripple effect on changing systems. Because, even if we took all of the racist people out of the systems are still going to produce racist outcomes because it's baked into the laws and policy. And so we also know that we can't rely on the systems to change themselves, right? They're just going to keep going. So we need the people who are in the systems to be able to change the systems. But if those people don't know what it's like to be in relationship with another person and to have addressed those biases and that internalized oppression, racism and or ableism, cisgenderism, all the isms, we're going to continue to produce systems that are oppressive and unequally advantaged and disadvantaged. So there's, the path to mutual liberation is not a one lane highway. It's like a multi-lane highway with many different ways of getting to that destination. And I'm not a protester. I'm not a sign holder. I do not like crowds. So that is not my work to do. That is somebody else's work to do. And I trust in that they will do that. What we're doing is our work to do. And we really focus on that relationship and that community building and that healing to be able to make change that way. And so I hope, my dream in 5 years is that we have these thriving communities of MAR members who are then taking what they're learning and going and applying it to their families and to their communities and to their workplaces, and that it's just rippling out.
Yes, it's possible. It's necessary. And maybe, the bodies within our government who, present the beautiful diversity can then turn and work with you on these homes in all the major markets so that you and your capable team can build these villages for communities. How can we help support MAR?
Yeah, we do on our website, we have a donate button. So there's the possibility to make a one-time donation or a monthly recurring donation. At this point in time, we don't have charitable tax status, but we're working towards that. We also love partnering with organizations. And so if you're a business that feels called to support this work, there is different sponsorship and partnership opportunities. So looking at like if the diverse book baskets was something that was like, oh my gosh, I love this, a sponsorship of $2,000 gets 20 diverse book baskets out across Canada. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a huge amount of money, although we would happily take that. Yes. If anybody has a house they want to donate, we'll take that. But there's also the opportunity to volunteer with MAR. Many hands make light work. We have about 40 volunteers doing a range of things from small tasks once a week or every once in a while up to like larger roles within the organization. And this path to liberation, there is a place for everybody. I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't have these skill sets or I don't have this. I was like, can you make sandwiches? Cynthia, one of our VP and a director on the board and an amazing individual, MR, that's what she says is like, if you can make sandwiches, there's a place for you in this work. So, I say if you can put stamps on an envelope, if you can call people, like there is a multitude of things to do. So there's always a place for somebody. So volunteering as well. And then just, even just sharing what we're doing. So if you're following us on social media, we have a Facebook page and we have an Instagram account. Following us there, liking those and sharing those out to share out that information. Those are all ways that we would love to have the community support us.
Amazing. If you want to connect with Moms Against Racism online, it is momsagainstracism.ca. Instagram handle Moms Against Racism, and similar you'll find on Facebook and I believe LinkedIn as well. You have a profile there, but I know Instagram and Facebook are quite active. Thank you so much again. Kerry Cavers, founder and president of Moms Against Racism. And she has so much to teach. She has taught so much today. I hope to have you on again at some point because I have a lot of questions to ask as you gathered from my question guide. And I have ones that I'm sure listeners would love to ask too. So maybe next time we'll put a call out to listeners and get questions from them as well. But thank you for taking the time today to share your knowledge, your experiences with us and more about Moms Against Racism.
Thank you again so much for having me. I've loved having this conversation with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kerry.
Be kind and truly connect. You are listening to Rachel Thexton.